May the memories of those lost be a blessing. May this community, which has shown its resilience so many times before, once again find the strength to heal.
To the people of Tumbler Ridge, Canadians across the land are thinking of you. The world is thinking of you. We know that in your small, tight-knit community, grief spreads across families, workplaces, churches, and friend groups, and know that all of us stand with you.
In Parliament, shows of solidarity for the people suffering in the wake of the shootings in Tumbler Ridge. I'm Catherine Cullen, and this week on The House, the MP for the small town on how he is trying to help. And here in Ottawa, another MP who survived the École Polytechnique school shooting on what the children of Tumbler Ridge need most and how to reclaim the town from this tragedy in the years ahead. And later in the show, the commander of the Canadian military's Space Division. What do they do, and why he believes Canada should assert more sovereignty among the stars. Plus, a rare interview with Justin Trudeau's closest advisor. Katie Telford was the longest-serving chief of staff to a prime minister in Canadian history. Her take on Trump and what she has to say about Carney's critiques of Trudeau's record. But we begin with love for Tumbler Ridge. The House is now in session. Friday night, leaders of all political parties gathered in Tumbler Ridge for a vigil to show support. It's something Bob Zimmer's been trying to do himself these past few days. He's the Conservative MP whose riding includes Tumbler Ridge. We spoke Friday morning. Bob Zimmer, thank you so much for taking the time, and my condolences to you and this community.
Yeah, thank you.
This is a place that you know well. What is it like there right now?
Yeah, it's just like I've been explaining, it's a beautiful place, right? You're right in the Rocky Mountains. It's beautiful people that are there as well, but it's a community that's just reeling from this tragedy. And so amongst the beauty, there's this dark cloud over Tumbler right now, and it's sad, but there's a lot of people giving each other hugs and shedding some tears. You know, we're hearing stories and about loved ones that aren't here anymore, just about fond memories. So it's I've just been so impressed how the community is really just loving each other and just there for each other. I'm honored to be there, just to be part of that. And it's really tough, but it's really beautiful in the same way, just the way people are treating each other.
You've been speaking to some of the families that were directly affected, that have lost children. What have people been telling you?
Well, I'll tell you, the first one, I met Zoe's mom, Lori, and met her sister, Sky, at the vigil the night, I guess it was 24 hours later. And you could just tell Lori was still sort of, there was a blankness there. She wasn't, what do you say? What do you even think? And her little sister was still bubbly and still sort of chatting with me, and obviously hadn't set in the reality her sister wasn't going to walk through the door anymore. But I'll tell you this, though, that was really, I asked, what would you say in one word, what would best describe Zoe? And they both said strong. And then they want to show you pictures of Zoe and this beautiful girl, loving life. So it's just sad. Yeah.
Terribly sad. And I mean, I know politicians, in a way, you're an authority figure, but you're just a person too. And I wonder what you say in a moment like that. You want to help, but what do you do?
Well, that's just it. I'd very just honest with them and say, I don't know what to say. Other than we're parents, we have children too. So I can't even imagine, but I can just imagine how devastated I would have been if I would have lost one of my children. So you try and empathize, and I think it's important just to even what doesn't come out, but you're still making the effort. They see that, and but just to give them long hugs and just assure them that we're listening and we're there for them.
I mean, this really all is just happening right now, as you say, describing Zoe's sister and still not maybe the reality having set in. But I think there's a real urge across the country to make sure that Tumbler Ridge gets the kind of support
Yes.
it needs. What is
Yes.
your sense of what that is going to be in the weeks that follow?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's obvious, just long-term support. There's been, conversations around mental health and the need, especially in rural places like Tumbler Ridge. But specific to Tumbler Ridge, we've just seen leaders, whether it's Premier, our leader Pierre Poilievre, or the Prime Minister, they're all just wanting to do what they can to help in that healing process. So whatever that looks like. And I think there's going to be some, you've asked a good question. There's going to be some good questions after this, or they're being asked now. And we're just going to have to dig in and really find solutions to these problems. We never want another community to go through what Tumbler Ridge is going through now.
You talked in the beginning about the beauty of the way that people in that community are supporting one another.
Yeah.
And of course, that's where all our attention is. I know a lot of your colleagues from across Parliament have reached out to you, and I wonder what kind of support they're offering you.
It's been just amazing. You see us in the House and we're debating and it gets heated at times, and rightfully so. There's some pretty serious issues that we're dealing with there, but I've just had an outpouring across party lines. My colleagues, obviously, just sending a little note saying, see what you're going through, just praying for your community, and, from across the aisle to just as many sending condolences and their thoughts and prayers. And it's really, I think it just reminds you, we just need to be a little bit more kind to each other, the person that's in the grocery store aisle that's, you don't know what they've been through that day. Just be a little bit more patient, just a little bit more kind, and love your neighbor. We've always heard that, but I think we just need to do that a little more.
Bob Zimmer, our thoughts are with everyone in Tumbler Ridge, and thank you for taking the time at this difficult moment to talk to us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for your condolences and your prayers.
BC Conservative MP Bob Zimmer. The killings in Tumbler Ridge have painful echoes for Nathalie Provost. She is a Liberal MP from Quebec and Secretary of State for Nature. She also survived the 1989 École Polytechnique mass shooting in Montreal, an event that spurred her to spend years advocating for better gun control. How is she thinking about this moment and the best way to support survivors and affected families? She joined me in studio on Thursday morning. Nathalie Provost, thank you for taking the time to be here.
It's a pleasure for me to be with you.
What went through your mind when you heard about what was unfolding in Tumbler Ridge?
Many things, and not always in the same direction. First, it was a big sadness. Another again. So, yeah, very sad. But I knew that there would be another one. And I realize now that it was a real loss of innocence in 1989. And since then, I don't know how, but I remember vividly that a month before the Dawson shooting, I had the feeling that there would be something else again. And so I'm very sad. I don't want it to happen, but I know that it happens. And we are in a moment in our history all across the world where life is tougher than it was before COVID. I would say it like that. And it's long, 6 years of tougher and more difficult. And the public discourse is more polarized. It's creating a distance and a position between people. We just feel it into the parliament. And so I am also worried of what will be the aftermath, because it's always difficult to keep the peace of mind it takes to heal. So I am very, very sad. I felt it could happen, and I am also really worried.
I want to talk for a moment about right now. I do want to talk about what you're saying about the future, but at this moment, so many of us are thinking about the children at that school And I wonder for you, obviously it takes on this whole other level of meaning. If you could speak to one of the children who saw a friend's life lost or who was injured, what would you want to say to those children right now?
I don't think they need words. I think they need warmth. They need a place to cry. They need a place to express the income. We cannot understand.
It's incomprehensible.
It's incomprehensible. So they need a place, and they need adults, strong adults, to be able to receive the grief, la colère, the
anger.
The anger. They need adults that will be able to understand that they need to express their hate, their anger, their incomprehension, all those very, very ugly feelings, because they need to be expressed. So if I would be with them, I would just stand there as an adult to receive that. And they will need it now, but they will need it for a long period of time. What I remember vividly right after the shooting and in the 2-3 years after was waves. It's big waves that just gently over time calm down. But at the beginning, it's a tornado, it's crazy. You just go from one state to another because you're alive. And I presume it will be much more difficult for those who lost their children.
You were older than these children, but you were still so young. 2 days after the Polytechnic shooting, you gave a TV interview from your hospital bed, and you talked about wanting young women who were the target in that case to keep studying engineering. You had stitches and a black eye, and even now, it is incredible to listen to a younger you say, it is incomprehensible, but we cannot let ourselves be beaten by malheur, a tragedy. It's that moment is so powerful. How hard was it, though, to live up to that declaration, to live that in the time that followed?
You have the same women in front of you. It's the same part of my heart that's standing here in front of you today. It's my way to cope with the tragedy. My way to beat the drama.
The tragedy, yeah.
And I didn't know that at that time. And when I listen to the young Nathalie, I am always amazed by myself, because I didn't know then that I had that capacity, that strength. And I think it's rooted in my history, in my education, and in my soul, that I need to use my voice. I need to do that, and I didn't know, but now it's clear to me. I need to be able, with my voice, to be active, to bring something, to calm us. And I would repeat it to them, please go back and recreate Tumbler Ridge. And that message is to the mayor, who has an awful job to do, David Eby also, but the mayor is now the father of all this village. And it's an incredibly difficult task.
I think everyone listening must say, yes, that's what we want for this community, but how? I mean, is that, you talked about the children being able to express themselves. I imagine part of that is ensuring there's adequate supports, grief counselors, but how do you forge that path forward?
Day after day. When your children is sick, you don't know how when you begin. But with them, you are the adult in the room and you do it.
This is still so fresh right now. We do have some information from the RCMP about what happened. They've talked about the shooter's history of mental health problems. They also said that the guns found at the scene were a modified handgun and a long gun. What does any of this tell you?
today. I know we will have to go to that discussion, but for me, it's a bit soon, and I knew that there was some weaknesses, some loopholes where we have to improve our laws. We will have discussions about that, not today.
How do we, you talked about this at the beginning, how do we have the discussions around this reasonably, in a way where the debate is not tearing us apart?
I don't think it will always be reasonable. In the last 36 years, we've seen that debate being more and more polarized because there is more and more money interest behind it and ideology position behind this. So it will not be easy, and I know that. But less than 48 hours after what happened, I don't think it's the time to have those discussions, and I don't think we will help us go through this drama together, because together is central to that story. And they are a very far community, isolated. It's difficult to go there. So it will be through social media that we will express them, our grief and our thought. And if we began too soon the discussion on what happened and how we can improve the tools of society, I think we will just bring them into a place where they are not ready to hear it. I remember clearly just after Polytechnique, and we were not in a time of social media, and we were just beginning l'information en continu.
Yeah, the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah, it was just at the beginning of that. And I remember, as a survivor, that I was shocked because sometimes a part of the story was taken by a journalist trying to do his job, but that was not the reality, but it became a reality. So it's very difficult to clarify exactly what the story is clearly about. So at least for a week, please, do not begin the inquiry, do not begin to do the analysis of what happened, to request changes in our laws in our way. And I'm really aware that we will have things to do. We have lessons to learn. But I think we need to have more peace in our mind, in our soul, to be able to do it correctly.
I want to close by asking you about something that I saw yesterday. Mm-hmm. I was in the House of Commons for the moment of silence and the speeches about Tumbler Ridge. And when it was over, when the party leaders had given their tributes, I saw a Conservative MP, Gerard Deltel, come over to you and give you what looked like a really big, heartfelt hug. Talk to me about that spirit of mutual support and sustaining that right now.
Globally, yesterday, that was the feeling into the House of Commons. We were not divided. We were all together with our colleague Bob Zimmer. We were behind them, with him, with the community of Tumbler Ridge. And so our different positions regarding that bill or that regulation or that policy didn't matter yesterday. And we need to have much more occasion to work together for something. So yesterday, we were all together, and for me, it was completely natural to accept and to share my grief with Gerard. And the first motivation is exactly the same. We want the best for our communities. And yesterday, that's exactly where we were.
Thank you very much for this conversation.
It's a pleasure.
Liberal MP and Minister of State, Nathalie Provost. I'm Catherine Cullen. After the break, we'll be talking to the commander of Canada's Military Space Division. Stay with us. I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House, making politics make sense. Follow us, and if you like, leave us a review or reach out directly. We're at thehouse@cbc.ca. Even if you've been pretty good about not using your phone much lately, there's one smartphone function you probably use far more than you even realize: GPS.
We all push the button, the Uber shows up or the Uber Eats driver arrives at our house. And that isn't something we tend to think about because it functions.
That's Brigadier General Christopher Horner. He's the commander of 3 Canadian Space Division, an arm of the Royal Canadian Air Force that's only a few years old. A big focus of his work is making sure that GPS continues to function for everyone.
I want Canadians to live in a world where I can push buttons on my phone and I know where I'm going, or I know where my kids are. My kids might not want that. But it's a part of our society now that we have to, from a military perspective and a national security and sovereignty perspective, look at the capabilities we require to harden the infrastructure we rely on and to be resilient in the face of threats.
The Brigadier General sat down with me here in studio to dive deeper into what some of those threats might be and where they're coming from. He started by explaining just how the military space division keeps across it all.
We are that centralized node for operations in the Canadian Forces that does space things. And that is really the depth of it for most people. We have 4 kind of major mission areas, so satellite communications and navigation. We think about how we empower the joint force to go forward and succeed wherever the country sends those Army, Navy, Air Force, and Special Forces individuals. We think about the way that they can operate their systems with precision and how we can communicate to higher headquarters or back home. That is the communication and navigation. We do space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and that is, in civilian terminology, Earth observation. So the same capabilities that look down on the Earth to help understand where wildfires are or ice flows or maritime traffic, we use from a continental defense perspective.
I'm going to get in here because observation sounds very benign, and reconnaissance, I think, to me, has a little bit more of an edge to it. So it's
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that if you were to speak to the Canadian Space Agency, they would talk about Earth observation and how we look at the Earth from space. As we look at the Earth from space, it is to look at the maritime approaches. It's to understand what could be threats to those approaches to Canada, to the Arctic, how that feeds into our relationships with NORAD and continental defense. That is the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance close to home. But we also have to look to where our forces go to provide the force protection required to enable those soldiers, sailors, and aviators to do their business and come home safely. We also do a really important thing called space domain awareness, which sounds fascinating.
It does.
It means we're looking up or looking from satellites into space at other things that are in space, trying to characterize the somewhere around 16,000 active satellites and pieces of debris that are orbiting the Earth. And that's for collision avoidance, that's for re-entry notification, and it's also to determine if certain countries have deployed certain capabilities that could be perceived as weapon systems or threats against national capabilities.
On that note, one of our producers, Emma Godmere, had the opportunity to speak with Sweden's acting space commander last year, Lieutenant Colonel Johan Nystrom. Here's how he described the threat environment.
Space wars are for real. It's not sci-fi anymore. It's here. It happens every day. China, Russia, they have identified space domain as a vulnerability. 15 to 20% of our gross national product in the Western world is depending on space infrastructure. So if we don't have access to space, and if our systems in space are attacked by Russia and China, that could have major consequences for us.
I mean, it sounds pretty serious. So talk to me about some of the principal threats that you see.
So some of the principal threats that I see are arrayed across both capabilities that are terrestrial, so from the Earth that beam things into space, not Star Trek beaming, but
disappointing.
Totally understand. But working within the electromagnetic spectrum to jam things in space from the Earth, and then systems that are in space that can interfere with the signals or the flight or the capabilities of other assets that are in space. And so, when we look at that and we look at some of the research and development being done by countries that may pose a threat to
Such as? He mentioned Russia and China.
Right. I can absolutely tell you that we face interference from what's happening in Ukraine right now.
We face interference.
Correct.
Can you say more about that?
I can say that the effects on the battlefield don't stay just on the battlefield, that they go into space and they can interfere with capabilities that are in space.
I want to be clear about this because it's significant. You are saying that Russia, or Russia and its allies, I don't know, are trying to interfere with Canada's ability to do work in the region.
I'd be super careful how I'd say that.
Okay.
I'd say that it's very hard to differentiate the types of signals and where they're coming from. But there's so much saturation of jamming, for the lack of better terms, that is emanating from areas in and around the battlefield that it's extending hundreds of kilometers into space. So whether it is direct and intentional, I don't have access to who is firing all of the systems, or if it's incidental, neither of that matters particularly. What matters is the effects that are being seen on the battlefield are being directed at. We have evidence that, Starlink and Viasat at the very start of the conflict were directly jammed by Russia. We're seeing how they play back and forth and looking at those different constellations. There's evidence of that, and that's been reported wildly. That is not just because things have come from the battlefield and they're trying to jam each other. They point antennas towards the sky and they try to blank out everything that's up there.
But I want to be clear, you're saying Russia is the source of concern for Canada right now.
Well, it should be. Yeah, absolutely. It should absolutely be, because their capabilities that they're developing or reportedly developing could be pretty terrible. There is open source reporting in 2024 around them considering putting a nuclear weapon in space. Now, that would be cataclysmic. That would be what I like to deem it as everything that we have come to rely on from a communications platform level or from a GPS level. If they were to deploy a capability like that and then detonate it, would be wiped out. And how we are resilient in the face of that kind of threat, or in the, if that is something that was to take action, they were to take action on that, that would be a significant concern. So this is why there's such a public outcry towards that over the last few years.
So what reasonably, though, could Canada hope to do in the face of something like that?
Well, stick towards, where we are good as a middle power in working with others to ensure the responsible use of space continues to be a thing, to focus on the importance of space as a thing that brings humanity together, that allows us to do exploration, the fundamental principles of the rules-based international order that allow us to do things in space for humanity. All of that would be compromised if a country put a nuclear weapon in space. And so we have to think about that. Canada is not going to develop a weapons system that does that.
That takes down potential Russian nuclear weapons in space.
No, we're going to work as a middle power with our partners globally to ensure that type of thing doesn't happen, and to I don't want to say and to hope they don't do it, but really put the diplomatic pressures where they're needed to be to get down that road. Now, from a military perspective, I only offer that advice of we should really put pressure on them not to put a nuclear weapon in space, because that would be a horrendously terrible thing for so many reasons.
Let's talk about what the Canadian government is trying to do now and what more Canada can do. We saw in the last budget about $200 million for sovereign space launch capacity. There's more money to work with the Europeans in space as well. Tell me about what you feel the priorities need to be, what the priorities are in terms of how Canada tries to deal with this domain.
Yeah, resilience, right? I think the fundamental reason the government put $183 million, I think is the number, for sovereign launch capabilities, to give Canada its assured access to space.
But right now we work with the Americans. We're going to work more with the Europeans. Why does Canada need to be able to do this thing on its own?
I would argue that this country could access a multi-trillion-dollar space economy. My background is in economics before I joined the military, and so I can't speak too smartly about economics because that was a long time ago, but what I can tell you is the space economy is growing rapidly. So from an economic prosperity perspective, it gives us access to a market we haven't had before. But I'm also seeing from a military perspective the challenges with the few number of launch providers that are available globally, and that Canada, as it develops both commercial or dual-use platforms or military space objects, craft, satellites, whatever you want to call them, will have to, at this point, give them to someone else to launch. And I think that's not a concern to most people, but it is if it becomes who has the most money to get their things into space faster. And then it will cost Canadians more to then find a pathway to have SpaceX or Blue Origin or Rocket Lab or someone like that launch it.
At this point, do you feel we have to worry about the extent to which we can still rely on the United States? I mean, there's obviously collaboration going on, Artemis too, but we also understand the context all of this is happening in with the threats against our sovereignty by Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's a future me when I'm a politician question. But what I would tell you at the military operational level is that we continue to be super operationally aligned from the space domain perspective. When we look at protecting and defending the continent, our individual countries, and then the critical infrastructure. The U.S. Space Force is very reliant on commercial partners to launch their equipment. And they have contracts in place to manage that. But the challenge is it's not just a military-to-military relationship. It's not just me as the 3 Canadian Space Division commander or the Department of National Defense asking the U.S. Space Force, to which we have a great relationship, to launch our military satellites or our commercial satellites. They are also reliant on commercial partners. And so there's I don't want to call it a monopoly because it's not quite that, but there's only a few companies that are currently launching capabilities into space. It's not just NASA anymore. You're seeing that commercialization. And so for us, it's less a concern about the partnerships that we have and the allies that we have at the military level, but more of the sovereignty we can gain as a country by having our own ability to complete the economic circle or economic chain of space. And I'll give you one example. We've incredible companies that can conceive, design, and build satellites. In Montreal, in Toronto, here in Ottawa, there's incredible intellectual capital and property in this country that is world-leading. But we have to rely on someone else to put all that in space for us. So we miss an economic opportunity, but we also miss sovereign control of our capabilities for a period of time. And that is the part, when I talk about resilience and strengthening our sovereignty, that's important from a military perspective.
As we are on the cusp of Artemis II being launched, this moment where we're seeing collaboration between Canada and the United States, but also thinking about the threats that you just mentioned, how do we best ensure that the future is about collaboration rather than confrontation in space?
So I think we have to start from a place of resilience and respect, right? And there's a lot of things out there that can threaten a lot of things. There's a lot of individuals that want to do that. But I think how Canada weathers some of that space storm is through our ability to be resilient. And that is both internal to the operations that we conduct, that is a review of where we need to go to defend the Arctic, to defend Canadians, to defend our sovereignty, but also what capabilities will we develop across Army, Navy, Air Force, and space to enable that long-term resilience for the Canadian Armed Forces, but also for Canadians.
This was a fascinating conversation, perhaps a bit of an unsettling one at times, but thank you so much for giving us your insights.
Hey, thanks, Catherine, anytime.
The commander of 3 Canadian Space Division, Brigadier General Christopher Horner. They are critical to the accomplishments of every world leader, but it's rare we hear much about a prime minister or a president's chief of staff. A new book takes a closer look at that role. It's called The Right Hand, Conversations with the Chiefs of Staff to the World's Most Powerful People. And one of the people profiled is Katie Telford. She was the longest-serving chief to a prime minister in Canadian history in her near decade with Justin Trudeau. She does not give a lot of interviews, but she is joining us on The House, along with the book's author, Phoebe St. Stocks. She is the founder of a media startup called Missing Perspectives that focuses on women's stories and news. Thank you both for coming on The House.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Katie, I want to start with you. Another chief of staff quoted in this book says that their time in the Prime Minister's office, was like, quote, an egg and spoon race on hot coals and broken glass for 1,000 miles. So my first question is, do you miss politics?
Well, politics is still around, and I will never stop paying attention to politics. I believe in it immensely, which is part of the reason I'm here. But I don't miss having to wake up ridiculously early every morning and read everything there is to know in the country and deal with whatever new thing has just been flung at us in a new story or headline. So there are elements that I am enjoying of the new life.
We're having a laugh, but it is an incredibly demanding job, and yet you held it for so long, the longest serving chief of staff to a prime minister in Canadian history, nearly a decade. Sometimes people last a couple of years. There are instances where it's just a few months in other countries. Why do you think that you endured longer than anyone else?
It's an incredible job. And so one of the reasons that I like Phoebe's book so much is I think it opens eyes, or I hope it opens eyes to many more people who might want to go into this kind of line of work. I believe that the jobs that political staff do are hugely important to how governments function, to how parliaments function. And so it's a privilege to be in that job. I had an amazing team that I worked with that supported me through all kinds of things. And, I essentially, raised a son from the time I was on maternity leave when I first started talking to Justin. He's just Justin now, about his leadership or his potential leadership. And my son is now 14. And so I had an amazing team that supported me being a mom through all this, but also just supported each other through everything. So it was amazing. And then I had a boss that I got along with really, really well. We worked really well together. We challenged each other well together. So it just kind of kept making sense.
Is there a key in your mind to getting the best result out of Justin Trudeau?
That's an interesting question. I think there are several keys. And we each had our own keys, the people that worked around him, whether it was his, director of communications or his press secretary. If they were bringing him to this building to do something, they would prep him in certain ways. And over time, you'd learn different things that would help. For me, I viewed myself, I had two hats, right? I ran the Prime Minister's office, which is a sizable office of staff. And then I also was the senior most political advisor to the Prime Minister. And so, wearing both those hats, I would both be advising him, but also ensuring he was getting the right advice from others. And whether it was from other political staff or from members of parliament on his team or from stakeholders. And he was someone who thrived off of more knowledge, not less. And so the deeper you could dive with him and take the time ahead of time on whatever the issue was, he would come out, even if he was only giving relatively short answers, he would come out and be able to give those answers in a much more succinct, clear way if he understood the full context behind it. And I think that's something that would surprise people a bit about him, because you'd only see him in front of the camera, that he was somebody who really, really needed and wanted the deep dive.
Okay, I want to bring Phoebe into the conversation here. You worked for a time in Australian politics. You said you've always been fascinated by this role of chief of staff. Now that you have interviewed chiefs of staff to so many incredible people, Nelson Mandela, Kamala Harris, Tony Blair, do you see a common thread?
They all, particularly because a lot of the chiefs I interviewed, including Katie, were chiefs of staff during the COVID pandemic. I think a key trait they all have, no matter who it was or what country they were serving, is the ability to be incredibly calm under pressure. And I think that's something we spoke about earlier this week with Ukraine, just being able to be that calm force in a team and kind of in that way, not protect your leader, but just kind of, make sure that only the bigger priorities get to your principal.
How much power do chiefs of staff have?
I think more power than people think. I'm sure you would disagree with that. But in a way, I would say, particularly from my experience working in the Australian Prime Minister and Cabinet, which I appreciate might be different, the relationship with the PMO, a lot of people wouldn't really come to realise that in many countries, a chief of staff can be the second most powerful person in government. And of course, a lot of people say that about America too. In a way, the chief of staff can be more powerful than the vice president. So I would say really powerful. And it's interesting, like a lot of chiefs of staff I interviewed really disagreed with the term the gatekeeper. But I do think in a way they can manage their priorities and what's going through to the leader that they're serving and managing access as well, which I would say allows them to have a lot of power in government. But I'm sure you would disagree with that.
Well, Katie, let me ask you, what is one decision you made? And I understand that a lot of this is providing information to the Prime Minister, but what's one decision you made that you feel had a profound impact?
I mean, I would say two things to that. One is, and this is probably why a lot of chiefs of staff will disagree with some of the things Phoebe says, which doesn't make Phoebe wrong, but we would have a different perspective, is it was very important to me to be very mindful of the fact that I'm not a decision maker. And so it was my job to ensure, kind of going back to my previous answer, it's my job to ensure he's getting the right information, that Cabinet is getting the right information so that they can be making the right decisions. So what I would say from a more management standpoint in the Prime Minister's office, something that was really important to me and sort of sticking with the theme of political staff was how we handled human resources and actually had a human resources office and a director of human resources and wellness within our team, because I think that did help allow political staffers to stay longer than they have in the past in our government, including a lot of women being able to have one, sometimes two children and continue working in the Prime Minister's office, which was not something I saw as a younger staffer.
Help me understand then the relationship that you have with these decisions that are made, because I understand that you're saying you're not elected, you're not the one who makes the decision. And yet my sense is you feel a sense of ownership, let's say, on the legacy of the Trudeau government, the things that were accomplished, the things that happened while he was in office.
Absolutely.
Like they're not your decisions, but it's still your product, for lack of a better word?
I was part of a broader team, so from that perspective, absolutely. And it's a government and it's a political party that I was obviously part of and still am part of the party. And so I'm very proud of the things that the government has done.
Phoebe, chiefs of staff around the world are spending a lot of time right now dealing with the tumult of the Trump administration. You talked about COVID and that experience as a theme through the book. What did chiefs tell you about the element of the unexpected and how that plays into running a country?
I think a bunch of chiefs I interviewed kind of spoke to the fact that a lot of your role is just putting fires out every day and also putting out those fires so it doesn't even get to your principal. But it's funny, I think it was Tony Blair's chief of staff, Jonathan Powell, he was saying that he could really only manage 4 crises at once. And then from then on, it just became unmanageable. And for him, I don't know what was happening, but 9/11 was definitely one of them. And that for him was like his threshold. So yeah, I would say the job in itself, I mean, it's funny saying this in front of Katie, who's a chief of staff, but like it is a very unpredictable job. And I think a part of that and being able to do the chief of staff job well is being able to prioritize the crises that you're coming up against.
Well, if I could just add to that, I think a huge part of the job was not only putting out the fires if you could, or having working with the team to do that, but it was also trying to find a balance between sort of the urgent, the thing that came up that day, the new crisis, and the important and the delivery of the agenda that you got elected to put there. And I actually think that's one of the toughest parts of the job, is figuring out how to kind of maintain the balance. It's not even quite a balance that you're looking for, but keeping your eye on the ball of the important while dealing with all of the urgent that's coming at you every day, and especially given some of the things that have gone on in the last number of years.
Well, and so this is where the question is going to go, Katie, because it has been almost exactly a year since that hot mic moment where Prime Minister Trudeau told a room full of business leaders in Toronto that the 51st state was, quote, a real thing. Trump wants Canada's critical minerals. What was the moment for you where you personally became aware of the gravity of that threat? Because after that moment, I think all of Canada started to understand what was really happening. But I'm curious when it clicked for you.
I don't know if it was around that statement or around what President Trump was saying on that. But what impacted me from quite early on, actually, I would say, before, because I was part of the team that went to Mar-a-Lago and things, and something that really struck me coming out of that trip was realizing that this was a president who had spent 4 years in between his first and his second mandate, which meant that he came in a very different fashion the second time around. He came in much more organized, with a plan, with a team that hasn't been doing the same kind of turnover that we saw in the first mandate. And, they were learning things in the first mandate, like what the first 100 days was, like the fact that in politics, the first 100 days really matters. As it turns out, the 200-day milestone and all the rest of them don't seem to stand out in the same way, but that one does. And I can still remember him grappling with that and his team grappling with that at the time, whereas this time they came in knowing all of those things, planning for those things, and also having spent 4 years thinking about what he wanted to do differently and what he felt strongly about.
It was clear to you, say, from that Mar-a-Lago meeting, that the threat was more pronounced? Because, Dominic LeBlanc said after that meeting, it's a joke.
Yeah, well, that's why I said I'm not speaking specifically to that statement, but more just that the overall challenge was going to be much greater.
So I'll come back
and
to
it wasn't easy the first time, dealing with the negotiations back then.
Well, so when we see how Donald Trump's threats have played out, the trade war that we are now very much living through, the conversation in this country has been about doing more to diversify trade, selling more of our natural resources. Do you wish that your government had done more to better prepare Canada for this moment?
Look, there's always things, I'm sure, that if I spent time kind of looking at everything, there's, I'm sure, lots of things that I wish we could have done more of as a government, though, if anything, we probably have been accused of doing too many things all the time as well and not getting a singular message out as much as we could have. I think, though, when it comes to Canada-US and being prepared for this moment, a lot of the work on trade, some of the deals that have been struck, a lot of that was rooted in work that was done before. And so they've been obviously, ramping up and going further and doing some really, really great work there. But all of that didn't just start in the last few months.
So you think, all things considered, you position Canada relatively well for this moment? Is that the takeaway?
I think so. It's a pretty hard thing to plan for. But I think in terms of thinking about, particularly when it comes to diversifying trade, that is an area that we spend a lot of time on, whether it was CETA or whether it was CPTPP. Like, those were all things that were going on throughout the time that we were in government as well.
Okay, Phoebe, I want to talk about legacy. You talked to Tony Blair's chief of staff, who was essential in negotiating the Good Friday Agreement for peace in Northern Ireland. But he also talked to you about how he regrets the Blair government's decision to participate in the U.S. war in Iraq. I wondered what your sense was of how the people you talked to dealt with the mixed record of their time in office.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting, particularly with Iraq and what happened in the Middle East. I interviewed Tony Blair's chief of staff, as you just said, Jonathan Powell, but also John Howard's chief of staff, Arthur Sitodinas, who Australian Prime Minister. And where Jonathan and Arthur were different was that Arthur went on to become a politician himself and then ambassador to the US. And what I found interesting writing the book after the interviews is reflecting on both of their responses to what happened in the Middle East. And Arthur was very much unapologetic, whereas Jonathan, as you just said, really regretted, decisions that were made, particularly with allegations of, SOFA government, and that they definitely could have done things better. And I do wonder if that's because Arthur went on to become a politician. Maybe that's shaped the way that he, is looking back on events. But it was, I think, particularly those two, they really stood out for me.
Katie, when it comes to your time in government, in power, Mark Carney has had some things to say on Justin Trudeau's climate plans. Too much regulation, not enough action. He said he focuses on the economy, while Trudeau, quote, had a different focus for Canada. He is undoing significant parts of the work that happened under your government. The consumer carbon tax, the electric vehicle mandate, 2 billion trees program, ditching the capital gains tax increase, dropping the digital services tax, scrapping the oil and gas emissions cap. Does any of that bother you?
It won't maybe surprise you to know I support this government and the Prime Minister a lot.
Yeah, but that wasn't the question.
No,
the question is what
I think the times have changed, right? It's a new cabinet. It is a new Prime Minister, and they are having to deal with different issues that are right in front of them in an urgent manner for the reasons we were just talking about in terms of Canada-US in particular, but also all kinds of other things that are going on in the world and here at home. And you've got to make different decisions in different moments,
So you see these decisions as necessary then?
I think so. And obviously the Prime Minister does, and he's a very smart man.
But some of this, though, is specific criticism. Too much regulation, not enough action. We're focused on the economy. They were focused on something else.
I've heard him say some positive things over time as well, though.
Listen, I do want to talk a bit about what's next for you. Justin Trudeau still out there making the occasional speech. In her book, Phoebe wonders whether you two would still continue to work as a team in private life. What does the future look like for the Telford-Trudeau team?
Well, I won't be making any announcements this morning, but I will say, perhaps to our own surprise, we're not sick of each other yet. And we actually have been doing some traveling and some speaking. We actually were on stage together about a month ago in Davos, which was actually a lot of fun. And so we're looking to do a little more of that. And, I got advice from a lot of different people, including some former chiefs of staff. And everyone's advice was take your time. Take your time. One of the chiefs of staff that Phoebe read about, it actually gave me comfort when I read her book, because all of the other chiefs that she interviewed were reflecting on experiences, whereas when I talked to Phoebe, I was actually still in the job. Mm-hmm. And one of the chiefs in her book, I believe it was Jacinda Ardern's chief of staff, Raj, he said it took him about 7 months to recover from the job. So I then did the math in my head of how many years I did relative to him, and I've still got some time.
Listen, Phoebe, Katie, thank you very much both for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Justin Trudeau's former Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, and Phoebe St. Elaine Stocks, the author of The Right Hand. Okay, that is it for us this week. Our crew on the house is Kristen Everson, Emma Godmere, Benjamin Lopez-Stephen, Theo Van Busicum, and our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Technical production by Miguel Plant. I'm Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.